Hi, and welcome to another episode of Inside DevOps. I'm your host, John Bristowe, and joining me on the show today is Josh Duffney, who's a senior cloud advocate for Microsoft. He's formerly at Stack Overflow. He's also a Pluralsight author. Josh, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
I've been watching you for a long time on Twitter, online, and I've been really impressed by your personal journey, focusing on improvement and learning. And you spend a lot of time learning. Like many of the videos that you focus on are around self improvement and effective learning. And I was wondering if you could tell our audience a little bit about some of the things that you're doing relative to your YouTube channel.
Yeah, so my YouTube channel is kind of like a little venture into trying to share some of the productivity stuff that I had. So the background story to this is a blog post called "Detaching from Distraction," which kind of sparked was a catalyst for a lot of this stuff. I did a 30-day digital declutter where I kind of just cut myself off from technology and gave myself some breathing room, and that really just changed a lot of the ways that I think. And so I started to learn how to use that excess capacity that I got from kind of cutting myself off from technology more and more efficiently, because I was juggling, being a husband, being a parent, being a full-time employee, and then still trying to do the things that I do on the side. And so this little foray was like, how do I share these things that I'm learning, that are kind of the meta things behind the scenes, right? The productivity things, the knowledge management things. And so that's what a lot of my YouTube channel is now. It might pivot in the future to more technical stuff, because this was kind of like an 18-month stint where I just kind of shared as much as I could. So a lot of it is around knowledge management and productivity. But I kind of went the gambit. I actually wrote, in that 18 months, I wrote a nonfiction book called Reclaim that I haven't I haven't published yet. I got kind of burnt out, so it's completely finished, just sitting there. I'll publish it at some point, but the whole premise of that book is to kind of take someone through that journey that I went through, where like, hey, I'm just completely overwhelmed with information. I'm always on the Twitter, and I'm always on these social media platforms, and I don't have any time. And it walks through how to kind of detach from those distractions and then how to rebuild a habit. So the most profound habit that I built during that time was learning to love reading. And so that's where people see like, or I'm always learning now. It's because I'm always reading. Because that has been the kind of the critical meta skill that I've acquired. And so the YouTube channel is kind of was a creative outlet for that amount of time and all those different areas. Like again, all the meta productivity type stuff.
Yeah, and I love that, and I also love the fact that you're giving back. This was a video series you built entitled "Bash for Beginners." I thought this was fantastic because oftentimes, as I was telling a colleague of mine, we tend to forget the fact that there's actually always new people coming into the industry, and what's assumed knowledge is necessarily not the case. And I went through this. Even though I use Bash daily, I was like, oh, let me check this out because I know you, and I was like, oh, I like Josh. Let me check this out, and I was really impressed. It was a really well done series.
Thank you. I think what's really hysterical, I was expecting to get a little bit of backlash from it because right before joining Microsoft, I was an MVP for PowerShell, and so here I am. My first Microsoft thing that I
Yeah,
ever
yeah,
did was Bash.
yeah.
But yeah, it's kind of crazy how much you. I'm often reminded of this with all of my coworkers. Like, a lot more than what you think, and
Yeah,
this course was kind of like a testament to that because I've just been forced to pick up Bash because I'm more comfortable with PowerShell, but I'm
right.
in so many Linux environments now that I had to, and so this course was just a way to kind of like solidify that knowledge that I picked up along the way.
Did you guys shoot this in a single day?
I did it over the course of a week. I'm not sure what Gwyneth did for her part.
Yeah. Yeah, it was really well done. I really enjoyed it, and, yeah, I gotta say it's really well paced, and, if you're looking for kind of an exposure to Bash and you know nothing about the command line, this would be a great way to get involved and, get your hands dirty, so to speak, and you guys do a really good I think, a really good way of setting this up by setting them up with code spaces and then kind of showing them getting started and what the commands are and then going all the way down to scripting and all that. I was really impressed. I was like, I know all this stuff and I'm like, yeah, I was watching it at 2 times speed, but I was like, at the same time, this is perfect. This is exactly what I would want if I was looking for something to get my hands dirty in Bash. And you guys, I think, hit it right down the middle, which was fantastic.
I'll give full credit to Gwyneth for all that. She did a really good
Okay,
job in framing the clips and time boxing them, so to speak.
that's
She did a great
awesome.
job.
So, along the same theme of continual learning, you actually did something that I was rather impressed on. So, this is a tweet that you sent to Jeffrey Snover, who's of course the creator of PowerShell, and you reached out to him and said basically, "Hey, why don't you join me for a little chat and talk a little bit about staying relevant?" So, what's this all about?
It's yeah, this is kind of crazy. So I, for whatever reason, when ChatGPT came out, I was like reminded of this talk that Snover had given about digital transformation. Because after just using that tool in Copilot for a little bit, I was like, we're in the middle of another transition as an industry. And so I went back to his talk because it's the whole talk is about that, about how you can kind of thrive through that change. And so I just started to like think about that talk, and he really hits. He really, his main point is to try and find transitions that you can invest in, and then you can kind of ride that wave of in the industry, and that can put you in what he calls an elevator job versus a stair job. The stair job's just kind of grinding it out, trying to get promoted and stuff. But if you invest in the right technologies, you can have an elevator job. PowerShell was an elevator technology for me, and so I was just thinking about that. And then I tweeted out one of his quotes from that talk, which was, I think, something along the lines of, don't be, um, don't be good at something that no longer matters. And then someone replied, like, well, how do you know that? Like, how do you know that you're, stagnant or investing in things that no longer matter? And so that's where the idea for this Twitter space came up. And I was like, I was just going to sit there and talk about it. I was like, but why not just invite Jeffrey
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
to the
I
space
like
as
it.
well? And so that's how it all kind of came about.
You know what's interesting about that is he tweeted this about 6 months ago, well, back in May, excuse me, and this caught me off guard. So, if you read this, he's talking about how when he created the first prototype for PowerShell, a friend cautioned him saying that this is the sort of thing that gets people fired. And he said, "I didn't get fired, I got demoted." And I talked to Thomas Lee about this quote, and I asked him for his opinion on it, and he gave me the backstory in a recent interview that I did with him. But I think this speaks to the fact of that elevator. Sometimes you got to take a risk, and you got to, if you believe in something, really, like, you got to press the 99th button, floor button, and kind of ride the elevator the whole way up, no matter how rickety the elevator is. But if you believe in it, then it can pay dividends. And then finally, the last thing I wanted to mention is the fact that you're teaching yourself computer science, which is awesome.
Yeah, yeah, more or less. So, my career started with the help desk. So I have an associate's degree in computer networking. That got me in the door at a service or at a help desk, and so I was help desk sysadmin. Then went into DevOps, and then I became an SRE at Stack, and then joined Microsoft and did a little foray into technical writing, and then moved where I am currently in cloud advocacy. And I'm just every position has just gotten me further or closer and closer to the app dev side or the developer side from the help desk. And so I was like, what's that final leap is the computer science stuff. So I'm noticing all these gaps, like in the programming languages that I use, they use these terms and like pointer, like I don't understand that like underlying architecture of the computer, or,
Sure.
like really struggle with like even defining what an algorithm was, because for me, like it's a function, it just does the thing. And so there's these gaps that I have, and I realize like all these gaps I have are my lack of understanding foundational computer science. And so that's kind of like the reason for it. And I'm just very interested in it. And so I read a book called Ultra Learning, which is, about autodidactic learning, self-learning. And so I just started to compile a bunch of resources. And this one that you have up here is probably one of the better ones that I found. And that second highlight there, aim for 1 to 200 hours of each of these topics, really kind of opened my eyes to how long of a journey this is going to be. So that's kind of the backstory reason why I'm doing it. But I'm kind of in the buckets of, really learning programming in the lens of Golang, and then data structures and algorithms as the two focused topics that I'm working on right now.
You've been dabbling with Go. You've been building on Go. You've been working with Go. How do you like it?
I like it a lot. It kind of hung me up in the beginning because my only real language before that was PowerShell, and people argue, a scripting language, programming language. But it made me realize like how much that language did for me. And so like a few things that tripped me up in the very beginning was like the statically typed, like everything has to be, type. And then it was compiled, so that was another like hiccup, and it's lower level, so you just have to do more. And I love this quote from Todd McLeod. It's Go suffers no fools. And so I definitely that helped me learn though things at a deeper level, and that kind of continued to kind of nudge me towards computer science as well. And then I noticed like all these tools that I use are written in Go. Kubernetes is written in Go, Terraform is written in Go. All the open source to CNCF, I think Go has a monopoly on CNCF landscape
I
tools.
was gonna say, like, the CNCF landscape is massive, and everyone seems to take a dependency on Go.
Yep.
It's everywhere.
And so, being in the cloud native space, that's where the team that I'm on, the cloud native team, it seemed like a really good bet. And so that's why I chose Go.
Are you actively developing in Go right now?
Yeah, so I'm contributing to a couple open source projects right now. The first one being the CNCF Notary Project, and so I'm working on a feature right now to add some subcommands to that. So that's the first one, and then I'm also working with a team that is developing Ratify. So that sits on top of AKS or Kubernetes and uses Gatekeeper to prevent like unsigned container images from being run.
Okay, so let's talk about each one of those. So Notary, tell me a little bit about Notary.
So Notary is it's a command line tool, but it also has a Go library that you can or a package that you can use that digitally signs container images or other artifacts. So that would be kind of like your signing thing. If you're working on the secure supply chain story, this tool will let you digitally sign artifacts and then verify those artifacts. That's the whole purpose of Notary. And then ratifies later in that chain when you're working with container images.
I see. And so this helps give some assurance when utilizing, I guess, external feeds or repositories for images. Is that right?
Yep.
Is this a missing capability today, or are they providing a open and Go-based way of doing this?
There are a few other competitors like Cosign, but it does seem to be missing from a lot of like the CI/CD. So my first contribution to this was to create a GitHub action that installed notation inside your GitHub action or your workflow runner, and then allowed you to sign inside that workflow. So it does seem to be kind of a missing component in a lot of the build process that we have today. We just kind of suck everything and cross our fingers. Kelsey Hightower has a really good talk on kind of like a very good overview of secure supply chain and just where the industry is going. The problem is like right now, it's just all these tools are hard to use and they're not very streamlined, and so that's kind of where Notary and those other tools are hoping to fill the void to make it easier for people to have to secure their software.
What was your experience like building GitHub Actions?
I had to learn JavaScript.
Yeah?
I had to, I had to learn a little bit of Java. It wasn't terrible, but it wasn't too bad of a process because GitHub does a really good job documenting it, and they give you some kind of boilerplate stuff. And then they also give you an example of creating a runner that installs the GitHub CLI. So with that, I had kind of everything I needed.
The thing I like about GitHub Actions is you're right. They've got a really nice framework or SDK or whatever you want to call it. They call it a toolkit, but basically they give you a means of doing all the sort of things that you would take for granted inside the context of an action. So they've got things for IO, they've got things for globbing, they've got things like a primitive HTTP client. We use these for the GitHub Actions that we built. We built 10 actions and we built them in TypeScript. So this action here will basically download and set up the CLI for use. Is that right?
Yep. Yeah. And if you want to use the Azure Key Vault, right now it only has functionality for the Azure Key Vault as a plugin, so you can have your repository elsewhere, and then you can pass in your key, your signing key ID, and then it will add that to the setup as well. But yep, it basically just provisions your runner for notation, so that way you can sign and use the notation CLI commands to sign and verify whatever you want.
It's funny. A lot of folks actually, when they look at the marketplace and they look at a lot of the actions that are there, a large a large chunk of them are doing just what you did, which is download and install a CLI.
Yep.
It's like pass control over to that thing over there. So that's funny. Did you for your action? Did you utilize the one of the templates to get started?
I did. Yeah. Yeah. I referenced the GitHub CLI action, the setup, and then also the Terraform CLI setup. And that kind of gave me a good framework for getting started. And then I had to add some, custom logic for notation itself. But that gave me the boilerplate, taught me how to, download using the toolkit and extract it and all that good stuff.
The Octoverse is basically GitHub's annual report of open source software on their platform. I don't know if you saw this, but one of the things that caught me off guard was that HCL is the fastest growing language on GitHub. Did you know this?
I did not. That's cool.
It is. It is, and right behind it is Rust. So one
Naturally.
config language and one programming language. What's your you haven't heard this before, so what's your take on this? What do you think when you hear that this is now obviously fastest is a bit of an interesting, it's a loose term, right? Because if you grow from 0 to 100, that's a huge volume. But what's your initial impression of this? The fact that the HCL is the fastest growing language on GitHub.
A lot more people are doing infrastructure as code, so to speak. You know, the old term for DevOps stuff. It seems, yeah, that's what I would take it as. Is a lot of people are using infrastructure as code to set up their environments, and they're using Terraform as that tool, which makes total sense.
This, I know the answer to this question, but I'll ask you anyway. What's your opinion of infrastructure as code and Terraform and Ansible and all the like? Are you a strong advocate of it? Do you like using the tools that are
Automate
there?
all the things. Yeah.
I know.
I mean, it depends on your environment. Like Terraform's really good for the immutable infrastructure, but my where I first got into the DevOps movement, I was in a very like Windows server centric thing, and we actually needed to go with more immutable because we couldn't just tear down our servers and rebuild them. We weren't there yet, and so we used Ansible heavily. And so there's a lot of big, do you use Ansible? Do you use Terraform? I actually, where my first foray into config management was, I wrote a PowerShell module called Invoke DSC that basically abstracted DSC into JSON that I
Yep.
could shove into Octopus deploy, interestingly enough, to provision web servers. So I started down the path of creating my own config management tool. And then after about 6 to 8 months of that, I was like, this isn't the right thing to do. It's going to be a long journey. Like, this is going to be my life if I decide to do this. And so then we adopted Ansible and pivoted to that. But then we started to move to the cloud and then do Terraform. So
Yeah, the thing about these things, I think the thing that you have to wrap your head around these things is when you realize that it's really state management that you're managing more than anything. You have two concepts of you have one concept of local state, you have a concept of remote state, and that you're using a tool to basically make one look like the other and reconcile differences between them. Once that clicks in your head, you like, oh, I get it. Like this makes sense now. What really is a bit of a mind scrambler is when you start writing providers for these things. So I've maintained the Terraform provider for Octopus Deploy for the past few years, and some of the concepts in there you have to wrap your head around. But actually, funnily enough, and this is where we're coming full circle, I think, a lot of the concepts around state management apply to computer science. So the fact that you're learning some of these fundamental concepts, you'll learn about state and state management and reconciliation. I'm a big advocate of Terraform. Obviously, I know that you are. Any thoughts or opinions on if someone were to say, okay, what's the big deal, like HCL and Terraform? What would you say to them? Like, automate all the things? Is that it? And they'd be like, I don't know what that means.
yeah, maybe. Yeah, that's just the funny meme. I mean, if you're tired of writing bash scripts that are super fragile or not, or having to click through a GUI and stuff, that would definitely be, I would encourage you to take a look at Terraform. It's interesting though, because now there's a new term that's kind of evolving, or a new role, which is the platform engineer. And I'm still trying to get my head around like what that evolution is, right? Because I left kind of that trajectory as an SRE, and then I moved, and then I was only out of SRE for a year, and then platform engineering emerged, and now SRE is kind of the old thing. And so it's going to be really interesting. But I think it's a kind of an evolution of this, where another coworker of mine, Luke, we were just talking about this, how like all like what we currently do now is shifting more and more left, so to speak, to software engineering. Because if you look at all these roles now, they say software engineer, comma, cloud infrastructure. And so they're no longer like the role of DevOps engineer or the sysadmin role is just getting more and more and more blurred with software engineer, because we're adopting tools like this with Terraform and Ansible and stuff like that, where all those software engineering practices are required to run those things at scale.
Yeah, it's that sort of you build it, you run it sort of philosophy, I guess, to a certain extent, but also taking into account other aspects as well, like developer experience. What does the API thing look like? Like there's other tools as well that I'm actually taking a liking to, like Backstage from Spotify. This kind of plays into this a little bit in my view, where you're managing all aspects of it and from front to back and everything in between. And I think platform engineering resonates with me as a developer, and having built a few products myself. I think it does strike the right tone as it speaks to developers. And so even though this show is called Inside DevOps, I think platform engineering is sort of like, in some respects a little bit, it's definitely associated with DevOps, but I think it's a refinement of some kind. because of the things that they talk about there. So you're finding that obviously infrastructure as code is helping. So tools like Terraform, for example, you're utilizing languages like Go, which has aspects to it that help you manage um, your solution. You talked about the CNCF, which is all about cloud native tooling. So you got an aspect of managing that. At what point do you think we start focusing on the higher level problems? Like it seems to me like we're all focused still down in the weeds. Like do you feel like we're moving up the stack in terms of abstraction?
That's a good question. Yeah, I guess I'm too close to the ground to really like to know too much from the abstract thing. I think we're still like as an industry, we're still in whiplash from cloud, and now we're about to hit another one with AI. But but I don't know where we're at in the abstraction sense. Yeah, I don't have too much to add there.
That's a good way to put it. Actually, I don't know, and
I
I
don't
don't
know.
know either. I've talked about Chat GPT for a while, and my opinion on it is that it's hard to kind of formulate where it sits. I think that for some folks it's a bit daunting, and for other folks it's kind of like, it's another tool in the tool belt, for folks to use. I'm kind of in the latter camp. And when it comes to, because I don't think we're anywhere near to really powerful AI. I think we have strong ish AI right now with things like GPT. We'll see what happens when GPT 4 comes out. But I think that it will be just another tool in our toolbox. I think it will help us get things done faster. I think that my
I
take on it.
so I always use the analogy. So I don't know if you've read the book Range by David Epstein. I think it's the subtitle is Why Generalists Triumph in a Specialized World. But there's this really cool story in there about how we can't beat artificial intelligence with chess and the board game Go anymore. Like it's just too far advanced. And because of that, this like new variant of chess has emerged where there's these where the human player is partnered with AI and is against another AI and a human character. And what has happened in that new version of chess is the human is freed from the tactical memorization, like that takes you a decade to learn all the strategies and memorize all the different moves and stuff. The computer just has that for you, and it's freed the human to think more strategically. So kind of back to your other point with the abstractions, I wonder if AI will help us free us enough where we can think about those more abstract things. That's how I see it kind of playing out in the programming sense as well. It's going to be really interesting to see how the profession changes with these tools over the next couple of years. I have no idea what will happen. I know I enjoy using the tools; it's very helpful for me. But like what those longer term ramifications will be, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think we'll use machine learning more effectively when it comes to things like memory management or allocations, and um, also like providing sort of like system services, things of that nature. I could see it being effective there, and it's just interesting to see where these things sort of play out. I don't know if there's an integration with humans, meaning there's a user at the end of it, that is silicon to carbon interface. I don't know if a solution like ML AI solutions are going to be that effective. I don't mean that they won't work, but whether they'll be effective will be the true test. I think there's a lot of assumptions in UI and UX right now that I don't think we're going to be able to solve. But I think it'll be interesting to see where it plays out. I definitely see a role to play in the lower levels. That's for sure. So where are you at with your learning journey with computer science? Again, I don't mean to come back to this, but I find it fascinating. So where in that journey are you just starting out, or are you head deep into it, or are like where are you starting off?
I'm probably like six months in, so I spent a good. I knew this was going to be a several year journey, and so there's this kind of a rule of thumb in the ultra learning where you should kind of cap your research to about 10% of whatever the long term thing is. So I kind of just roughly guesstimated if I spend 2 years, kind of like moderate, like basically part time in school, working on computer science, like reading books and stuff like that. Um, 10% was like a couple months of research, and so that's what I've been doing the last few months is just like lightly superficially reading different books to get an idea, talking to eh, having people like you recommend great books like that, and so that ranks them up, and kind of collecting resources. So I'm kind of like I would say like maybe a month or two into like my first semester of it. The focus point for me is still programming because there's still so many gaps that even though I've been coding for probably like a decade, there's still so many gaps at the lower level that I have because I've been using such a high level, just solving more practical problems and not really understanding the underneath. So programming still a big sense of that. I understand like most of the constructs of it, but I'm trying to get deeper into programming and understand a lot of the more computer sciencey terms, so to speak. And then also just data structures and algorithms and getting my head around them. That's where I'm currently at, but I'm really looking forward to the compilers and like creating your own language. There's a really great quote. What was like something around like the good engineers can master a language, but the great engineers will be able to create the language because it'll give you such a foundational understanding. Like you'll be able to pick up languages really quickly if you've been able to write one, just because you'll have a deeper understanding of computer programming language in general. So that's kind of where I'm at. Maybe a couple of months into it, if you were to like look at it from like a 4-year degree perspective.
I asked that question for a reason because you're at Microsoft. I would imagine you'll start to see a lot of those algorithms when looking at a high level at Azure. A lot of the problems that are being tackled and addressed by cloud are based on a lot of these algorithms like scheduling and shortest path and you know some a lot of the stuff that you'll look at. I think you'll start to see. I think Azure will expose you to a lot of the thinking that's gone into that. Like there's a lot of good computer science obviously in cloud because it scales so well. And so I think you'll find that when you look at it, it's kind of like when Neo goes and sees the Matrix. The same thing will happen when you get through your computer science degrees, courses and degree. You'll start to see cloud and systems in a totally different light. Like everything's been miniaturized down into what we're doing is basically taking the computer and fanning it out with the internet and making it available for everyone to use. We're kind of back to the mainframe days, but it's built in such a way that we don't have we kind of sort of, but we don't have time slicing. We don't have to worry about terminals being connected directly. But all the stuff that goes into building applications, like if you look at Azure Functions or Lambdas from AWS, or you look at various parts and pieces around um, distribution of load and things of that nature, like scaling with Azure, for example. The fact that you have all these sliders in there, all that speaks to the foundations of computer science. I think you'll look at the like that algorithms book will talk about this. Many of the things that are described in those systems are all about distributed systems, and that's where all the heavy lifting goes on.
Well, hopefully I start to see it. I'm sorry, like it's interesting. Like I've just dabbled a little bit. I read Grokking Algorithms is a very like rudimentary, like beginner book, but it's starting to get to the point where I'm starting to see a little bit of that. So I hope that continues on as I go.
Yeah, it's like listening to a record, that's on slow and it's like going grr, 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 and then as it starts to make sense, it starts to go faster, like ner, 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 and you can start to hear the melody as you start to pick up these concepts. So it's fascinating. Yeah, I find that cloud, when I look at it, you're like, oh, I get it. It's just providing functionality in this nebulous area that I have access to and just can pay money, and then I don't have to worry about managing myself. We're still tackling the same problems, but in a way, also they're actually abstracting a lot of the things that they're abstracting away a lot of the stuff you have to do to get best practices built, like stateless function access through Azure Functions, for example, is a great example of that. Like just have something, you set it up, fire, forget message passing. All these things are concept that we talk about a great deal in computer science. Like I think I suspect you'll be reading one of the algorithms book and you'll be like looking at it like, I know this, I've seen this. Oh, that's right, it's in Azure, sort of thing. So I'll be very interested to watch your journey as you go through this.
I'll be sure to share it. Share it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So you're currently on the advocacy team at Microsoft. Do you guys travel around and tell folks about Azure and things that you can do with your stack?
Still not a ton of travel. There'll probably be a couple events this year. But yeah, a lot of what my team does is we try to be the shim between the community and the product teams. And so a lot of us on the cloud native team are really around like the AKS upstream products and projects. And so a lot of community involvement, again, like active on GitHub and then with the community team. So my team's a little bit different where we're not kind of like the traditional advocacy team where we're moving around doing a lot of conferences. We still do that, but a lot of ours is community focused contributions and then feedback front back to the product team.
And generally speaking, when looking at AKS, I think when I look at AKS and I look at other comparable solutions on, say, like AWS or GCP, for example, I think I think that's almost an indictment of Kubernetes. It's kind of like Kubernetes is too difficult, so we provided this service to make it easier. What's your is that a sentiment that's shared by customers?
I think to a degree, right? Where you want it's the same thing with all the PaaS offerings and the SaaS offerings. Like I want to use this thing; it's a little too complicated for me to handle. Or my value isn't in having people that can run this; it's in delivering value to the customer, and so I'm going to pay to have that service managed. And what's really interesting with a lot of those projects, not even with Microsoft, well, what's really interesting is a lot of the projects that I'm working on, they have collaboration across the three big clouds. So there's, with a Notary project, there's and Ratify, there's engineers from Amazon, Microsoft, and oftentimes Google all working on this open source project because downstream their managed services of Kubernetes benefits from that project. And so that's kind of a really interesting take where they're working together to help make the managed services better because they know that Kubernetes is a complex beast and a lot of people are willing to pay a little bit extra money to have that managed for them.
Yeah, I'm reminded of a site. I don't know if you saw this, but this is a site called Festivus.dev, and there's this. It's basically the person who runs this is an engineer, and basically has all these takes where he takes these gifs from Seinfeld and basically talks about each one of these. And so, as an example, this is one where Kramer decided to use Kubernetes for his website. I'll let you enjoy this later on, but basically, like Kubernetes, he's using Kubernetes for cloud for planet scale, and he's like, I got to do it just like all those Kelsey Hightower demos that you see at KubeCon, for example. And he's like, you run a fruit selection website. Like, why do you need like millisecond response times? So I can't do it justice. But if you watch it, it's quite
I'll take a
funny. I
listen.
mean, it's just basically captioned, right? So like, I decided to use Kubernetes, massively distributed, whole new approach. Like it just and like Jerry's cynical and he's like, just totally trashes it. And
Service mesh.
anyways, yeah, I know. So I won't ruin the jokes, but it's quite funny. So anyways, the reason why I mention this is because of the fact, obviously, like Kubernetes is like, a hammer and everything is a nail, I guess. But I mean, it's really hard in some cases to hold. Like I've used Kubernetes for a while now, and it's just like you feel like you're walking onto an airplane cockpit. You're like, wow, what are these? Like, what are all these knobs and switches? And so when I look at what you guys are doing over at Azure with AKS, for example, I'm like, okay, good. This is like a simpler, I guess in some capacity, it's made an easier, maybe not simpler. Maybe simpler is a better term than easier. Simpler solution for doing this type of work. Would that be a
Yeah,
fair
I'd say so.
assessment? Awesome. Well, thanks for joining me on this show of Inside DevOps. I really appreciate your time,
It was a
Josh.
pleasure.
Thanks.
Always enjoy talking to you.